Linda is 24, standing behind the cosmetics counter of a downtown department store on a Tuesday morning in 1959. A gold lipstick tube sits open by her mirror, a tissue folded beside it, a clipboard of approved shades tucked behind the glass. She already knows the shade she wears will be red before she says a word, and number 1 reveals the real rule that lipstick was only ever protecting. Number 12. The approved shade list. Behind Linda's counter is a clipboard nobody outside the store ever sees. It lists which shades a saleswoman is supposed to recommend, and which ones she quietly steers most customers away from. Names like Revlon's Cherries in the Snow, launched in 1953, and Fire and Ice from the year before, were built as more than color, right down to the advertising copy that promised to reveal something about the woman wearing it. They were personality tests sold in a gold tube. Pick the wrong one, and a customer might be told, gently, that it simply wasn't quite her. The clipboard never once explains why. It doesn't have to. Everyone behind the counter already knows the difference between a shade that reads respectable and one that reads reckless.
Number 11. The powder room rule. At a well-known 1950s secretarial finishing school, the lesson was simple. Lipstick was encouraged. Applying it at your desk in front of anyone was not. A 1951 magazine feature on the school shows young women taught to slip away and reapply only in the powder room, out of sight, as if the color itself were perfectly fine, but the act of choosing it in public was not. Linda follows the same unwritten habit before her shift starts, snapping her compact shut the moment anyone at the counter turns toward her. The click is small. The rule behind it isn't. Number 10. The bright red ban. That same finishing school warned its students against bright red or fuchsia clothing in an office setting, even while lipstick in nearly the same shade was considered perfectly proper. Linda keeps her boldest countersamples in one drawer and her own toned-down blouses in another, because standing out in the wrong color on the wrong body read as asking for attention rather than simply being seen behind the counter. A shade could flatter a lip and quietly condemn a collar in the very same week, under the same fluorescent light. Nobody ever explained the difference out loud. They didn't need to. It stayed in the room. Number 9. The soft voice standard. Etiquette writers of the era, Amy Vanderbilt among them, spent real column space on how a woman should sound, not just how she should look. Modulated, pleasant, never sharp, never loud, never tired out loud. Linda answers the store's telephone in the same even tone every time, whether the caller is patient or rude, holding the receiver a little away from her ear so no one hears the sigh underneath the greeting. A raised voice read as unfeminine. A flat, tired one read as difficult. There was only one acceptable register, and she'd learned it the way she learned which lipstick not to recommend, quietly, by watching what happened to the women who got it wrong. A voice could be managed. A name was about to prove much harder to control. Number 8. Miss or Mrs. on the name tag. Linda's name tag reads Miss Linda, not because the store required that much detail, but because leaving it off wasn't really an option anyone offered her. A title told a customer, a co-worker, a supervisor, exactly where a woman stood before a single word was exchanged. Miss meant one set of assumptions. Mrs. meant another. Neither belonged to her alone. The tag pinned to her blouse scratched faintly against the fabric all day, a small discomfort attached to a much larger one, the kind she stopped noticing the way you stop noticing a tight shoe. It wasn't identification. It was a public record, updated the moment she changed her own last name, whether she wanted that update announced to every customer at the counter or not. Number 7. The introduction rule. Amy Vanderbilt's syndicated column in November of 1954 answered a letter from a Detroit secretary who sat 3 feet from a visiting Englishman all afternoon and was never once introduced to him. Vanderbilt confirmed the hierarchy plainly, without apology. A subordinate woman is introduced to a superior man, not the reverse, because business introductions and social introductions follow different rules entirely. Linda has felt that same silence, standing at the register while a manager walks a supplier past her without a word of acknowledgment, as if she were part of the counter itself. Politeness had a chart behind it, and she wasn't anywhere near the top of it. So far, these rules had only cost her comfort. The next ones started costing her time she was never paid for. Until now, the rules lived in her compact, her name tag, and the hush of a hallway conversation that continued without her. The next ones lived somewhere colder, in filing cabinets, company manuals, and forms with someone else's signature required before hers could count for anything. Number 6. The coffee rule no one wrote down. Nowhere in Linda's job description does it mention coffee, and yet a supervisor's cup appears on his desk at the same hour every morning, carried there by a woman whose actual title has nothing to do with serving anyone. Refuse, and you're suddenly not a team player. Comply, and the labor disappears completely, unlisted, unpaid, invisible on any timesheet a company would ever bother to produce. The steam rises off the cup the same way it always has, and the tray rattles faintly on the walk back to the counter. Nobody schedules it. Nobody questions it. It was simply understood, the way so many of these rules were, as something a woman did because someone had to, and she happened to be the one standing closest when the task quietly needed doing. Number 5. The scale behind the glamour. Airlines through the 1950s and into the 1960s held stewardesses to strict weight standards, often cited somewhere near 105 to 135 pounds, depending on height, checked before flights on a scale kept behind the closed door near the gate. Linda's cousin flies for one of the big carriers and steps on that scale the way other people punch a clock. Cold metal under stockinged feet. A supervisor marking the number on a clipboard without looking up. The scale doesn't ask how she handled a rough landing or a difficult passenger. It doesn't care how good she is at the job. A number, and only a number, decided whether her uniform still fit the version of her the airline had originally hired. Number 4. The age limit nobody forgot. The same airlines that weighed their stewardesses also retired them, often near 32, sometimes 35, and required them to be unmarried from the very day they were hired. It's part of why the first wave of sex discrimination complaints to reach the new Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 came directly from stewardesses fighting exactly these rules. Age restrictions were ruled illegal discrimination in 1968. Marriage bans took years longer to fully disappear. Linda's cousin keeps a resignation letter half written in the back of a drawer, dated for whenever the wedding is finally set. The ink already dry on a decision the company had made for her long before she'd made it herself. A ring finger, not a performance review or a single missed shift, would be the thing that ended the career. Number 3. The rule hidden in the paycheck. The Equal Pay Act of 1963 said, on paper, that equal work deserved equal pay. Linda watches a new stockroom hire, a young man with far less experience than her, take home more than she does, for fewer hours on his feet. the ink on both pay stubs smudging the same way under the same fluorescent light. The law existed. The envelope in her hand didn't always follow it, because job titles could be quietly rearranged to sidestep exactly what the law was written to prevent. Nobody at the store called it unfair. They called it the pay scale for the position. The paycheck was real. Whether her name alone could do anything with it once it left her hand was the next question entirely. Number 2. The form that needed a man. Before the Equal Credit Opportunity Act of 1974, a bank in many parts of the country could legally ask a woman for her husband's signature before opening a line of credit in her own name, or refuse her a credit history separate from his entirely. Linda tries to open a store charge account under her own name and watches the clerk slide the form back across the counter under the fluorescent light, asking politely for a cosigner. Her paycheck was accepted at the register every single day, no questions asked. At the bank window, it wasn't enough on its own. If money needed a man's name attached to count in some places, a roof over her head needed one too. Number 1. The rule the others were protecting. Here's the part that explains everything that came before it. In many markets before the Fair Housing Act of 1968, a landlord could refuse or quietly discourage a single or divorced woman renting an apartment alone. No explanation required, no form left behind to prove it. Economic historian Claudia Golden has documented how marriage bars once kept married women out of teaching jobs and clerical work entirely in many districts, on the simple, unspoken assumption that a wife's future belonged to a household, not a payroll. Add it up, and the lipstick shade, the powder room habit, the name tag, the coffee cup, the scale, the wedding ring, the paycheck, and the bank form were never 12 separate customs. They were one long test, applied everywhere a woman tried to stand on her own 2 feet. She could do the job. She could sell the color. She could balance the ledger down to the last cent. But her independence still needed someone else's permission, spoken or unspoken, stamped or simply assumed, before it was ever allowed to count as real. That was the rule underneath all the others, the one nobody had to write down, because everybody already knew it. Linda closes the same gold tube from the beginning, counterlight catching the last smear of color on her fingertip. The written rules had names now, laws, dates, forms with lines for signatures. The unwritten ones never needed defending, because everyone already knew them. If a lipstick tube, a name tag, or a form like this lives in your memory, tell us below, subscribe, and meet the next hidden rule.